Thanks for coming, guys. I'll start. Look, we all want the wasteland to move toward a truly free society someday. No kings, no congressmen, just individuals trading and living without coercion. But given the options on the table in New Vegas, I'm putting my chips on the new California Republic. Yeah, I know. The NCR is a state, taxes and all. Not exactly AnCapistan. However, it's a constitutional republic built on some semblance of law, property rights, and stability. In a world of raiders, irradiated ghouls, and people eating each other, a little rule of law goes a long way. The NCR at least claims to uphold personal liberty and the rule of law, and uneven as that is in practice, it beats outright tyranny or chaos. They've got courts, imperfect but existent, recognized private enterprise, caravans, ranches, casinos under regulation, and have a functioning economy. Sure, the NCR charges taxes and issues paper money, but it's also protecting trade routes from fiends and keeping the peace on the roads. With NCR victory at Hoover Dam and New Vegas, we get an integrated region with infrastructure, security, and maybe, just maybe, the space for libertarian reformers to push it in a freer direction over time. It's the best foundation we've got for a future libertarian order, flawed as it is. I'd rather have an imperfect republic I can influence than a slave army or a corporate oligarchy I have zero say in.
My turn. Don't choke on that Brahmin steak, Aaron. Now, I will admit none of these factions are delivering a pure Rothbardian utopia. But if I have to pick who should run New Vegas and shape the future, I'm backing Caesar's Legion. Hear me out. Yes, they're harsh, but they're also the only group that isn't pretending that state coercion is benevolence. The Legion flat out rejects the corrupt sham of democracy that the NCR pushes. No voting to loot your neighbors, no bureaucrats writing endless regulations, just a strict code of private law and order. Caesar has essentially privatized governance under his leadership. I mean, the Legion operates more like a military order or a giant defense company for the region. They eliminate raiders, tribals, and all the degeneracy that makes trade and peaceful life impossible. Chem fiends terrorizing travelers? Not under the Legion's watch, they'd be crucified on sight. Slavers and bandits preying on towns? The Legion either wipes them out or folds them in and forces them to behave. It's brutal, sure, but it's a brutal world. The NCR's personal liberty talk is hollow when their own land is crawling with crime and corruption. The Legion's approach is to wipe the slate clean, abolish the decadent influences, enforce a common law as dictated by Caesar that everyone understands, and reject the NCR's taxes, inflated money, and political graft. Long term, I argue that a society under the Legion, once it stabilizes, could evolve towards true freedom. Better a strong, austere starting point than an unstable democracy that will only grow the state. Caesar's making hard choices now so future generations won't have to. In a sense, he's the shock therapy the wasteland needs to achieve real order and security, the prerequisites for any liberty at all.
Alright, you two, make room for the third head of this Liberty Cerberus. You both make fine speeches for your chosen devils, but I'm betting on Mr. House and his New Vegas free economic zone. Honestly, it's the closest thing to a voluntary city-state we've got. House is essentially a 300-year-old entrepreneur running New Vegas like his private enterprise. That's way closer to anarcho-capitalism than either a bloated republic or a fanatical warlord empire. Think about it. House doesn't want to govern your life. He wants you to come, do business, have fun, and maybe pay for a monorail ticket or an entry fee to the Strip. Under House's victory, New Vegas remains independent from NCR and Legion both. He keeps the Strip secure with his own Securitron police force's private security robots. How cool is that? And lets the rest of the Mojave run itself for the most part. You don't see House forcing Freeside or Goodsprings at gunpoint to pay him tribute. He's content to defend his casinos, make caps, and let commerce flow. In House's Vegas, casinos compete freely well under his oversight, but he doesn't micromanage their day-to-day. Caravans and traders are welcome without being taxed to high hell, and multiple currencies circulate. Yeah, that's right. Caps, NCR dollars, Legion denarii, it's free banking, baby. House isn't forcing a monopoly money on anyone. Compare that to NCR's inflation. Happy Central Bank or Legion's one and only Caesar-approved coin house just says bring your caps, bring your cash, whatever, as long as it spends. Sure, he's a bit of an autocrat on the Strip, but it's his property. He literally saved Vegas from nuclear annihilation and rebuilt it, so by homestead principles, he's the legitimate owner. And as a private owner, his laws are basically just terms of service. No violence in the casinos, don't mess with his robots, and pay your bills. In exchange, you get electricity, clean water, entertainment, jobs, and zero meddling in your personal affairs. That to me is the most libertarian outcome. A laissez-faire oasis in the desert, run by a man who fundamentally cares about profit and progress, not power for its own sake.
I'm about ready to jump out of my seat here. Aaron, I expected Dominic to tout House's pre-war capitalism on steroids, but hearing you praise the NCR as a foundation for liberty? Come on. The NCR is a giant coercive state. They talk about democracy and personal liberty while strong-arming every settlement they can for resources. You mentioned they have courts and property rights. Tell that to the squatters in Freeside or the sharecroppers near McCarran. NCR rolls in, plants their flag, and suddenly folks have to follow their laws and pay their taxes, like it or not. You remember Vault 15 squatters? NCR tried to annex that, promising protection, but really after the Vault's resources. And isn't the NCR the bunch that set up the NCR Correctional Facility out in the Mojave? You know, the place that was basically a forced labor camp for prisoners until it blew up in their faces? Very libertarian, not. They'll jail you for Brahmin theft and then use you to build their railroads. And let's not forget how they handled dissent. Ask the followers of the apocalypse, who got cut. Oh, because they dared question the Mojave campaign. Aaron, you say you'd rather influence an imperfect republic. Good luck with that. The NCR's bureaucrats can barely even count the ballots, let alone listen to vocal minorities preaching anarchism. By the time you convince them to shrink the government, they'll have already conquered half the wasteland and taxed everyone in it. And, Dominic, House is no saint of liberty either. You paint him like he's just a chill property owner. Sure, House saved Vegas, kudos, but now he rules it with an iron if velvet-gloved fist. 3 families on the Strip literally swear fealty to him. If they step out of line, his Securitrons will turn them to red mist. You've seen those zap guns. Freedom? Only by his grace. If you're not useful to House's grand plan, he doesn't care whether you live or die. Why else does he let Freeside rot in poverty outside his gates? The only reason he doesn't extort them is because they've got nothing he needs yet. Try opposing House openly and see how long you last. At least with Caesar, what you see is what you get, a brutal but honest rule. House hides behind glitz and glamour, but he's just as much an authoritarian. When NCR first came, he made a treaty just to buy time, and he'll make whatever deals ensure his dominance. If he wins, you get one city thriving maybe, but everywhere else, either under House's robot patrols or left to fend for itself against fiends and wildlife. That's not a free society, that's one giant company town where Mr. House is the CEO and dictator for life. How is that substantially better than a state? The only DI errance is you pay him in casino profits instead of formal taxes.
All right, Caleb, I was waiting for you to unload on the NCR. You raise fair points. The NCR is far from perfect. They've got corruption, they've overextended, and yes, they run old world-style prisons and have taxation. From a pure Rothbardian perspective, any state looks bad. But we're talking relative merits here. The question is, which faction's victory best sets the stage for liberty in the long run? And I maintain that's NCR. You accuse NCR of strong-arming settlements. Yet most places want NCR's protection because the alternative is getting butchered or enslaved. Those squatters in Freeside? Many of them are NCR citizens who fled west to escape something worse, and now petition for NCR to annex the Mojave so they can be under the Republic's laws. Heck, West Side and Freeside locals may gripe about NCR, but they also line up for the NCR's water rations and medical aid when available. It's not black and white coercion. People see some benefit in joining a larger republic. Yes, NCR has taxes, but at least those funds somewhat go into public services, not just lining a dictator's pocket. They've rebuilt roads, set up ranger stations for safety, funded the OSI for crop research, before the war effort drained it. You mentioned the followers. True, NCR brass didn't like their criticism, but NCR didn't jail them or crucify them. Worst case, they just stopped funding. In Legion territory, the followers would be executed for spreading seditious ideas about medicine and education for all. And talk about representation, NCR citizens can and do complain about their government. There are newspapers in Shady Sands openly criticizing the president. Try publishing an op-ed against Caesar or House. NCR's Senate and offices at least allow petitions. Did you know the town of Novak invited NCR in for protection? Under Caesar, towns don't get to invite, they get invaded. Under House, well, he doesn't bother protecting Novak at all. So the poor residents would be lunch for the next pack of feral ghouls if NCR pulled out now. Dominic, I see you grinning there. I'm not letting House off easy either. House is impressive, I grant. A visionary, a powerful individual. I respect that entrepreneurial spirit. But at the end of the day, Mr. House is one man ruling an empire of robots. The so-called free economic zone only stays free so long as House decrees it. If tomorrow he decided to double the Strip's rent or ban a caravan company he dislikes, who's to stop him? There's no law above House in New Vegas. At least NCR has some checks, a president, Congress, courts, even local sheriffs. With House, if he wants your casino, it's his. Hell, the man literally takes a cut of every casino's profits just because he can. Sounds a lot like a tax, except it goes straight to Mr. House's coffers. and the Securitrons enforce whatever he programs them to. If you're cool with an AI army policing you, great, but forgive some travelers for preferring human sheriffs bound in theory by law and accountable to voters. I'm not saying NCR is the AnCap endgame, but it's a known quantity with limits on its power, even if small ones. House is an unknown tyrant who's kept himself alive for 200+ years. What happens in another 50 when he's still in charge and maybe loses his marbles? Or when he decides he is the state? For all we know, House might crown himself King of Nevada once NCR and Legion are gone. Then your voluntary city-state could look a lot more like a high-tech kingdom.
You both have some valid hits on my guy House, so let me address those, and then I have a bone to pick with each of your factions. First off, Caleb, you said House rules with an iron fist and Freeside rots because he doesn't care. Well, House's philosophy is basically laissez-faire. He's not in the business of nannying every wastelander. Freeside's outside his strip jurisdiction. And yes, it's a rough area, but it's also free from tyrants. The kings run a gang there. The followers run their clinic. That's local self-government at work. House only intervenes if someone threatens the strip's security. If Freeside wanted to prosper, they could voluntarily cooperate with House or form their own market solutions. It's not House's job to play welfare state. And note, when the NCR squatters in Freeside stirred trouble, House didn't send robots to round up the locals. The conflict more or less resolved with the king and NCR sorting it out, with a little help from a certain courier, if legend holds true. My point is, House's neglect is just him not imposing control where it's not absolutely needed. That's in stark contrast to NCR's impulse to plant a flag everywhere, or Legion's impulse to enslave everyone for their own good. House respects a kind of natural order. He protects his property, the strip, fiercely, and negotiates mutual benefit the three families, the NCR's Hoover Dam Treaty. But he doesn't micromanage beyond that. Now, Aaron, you worry that House could flip and become a crazy tyrant since he's one man unchecked. Sure, anything's possible. Maybe he wakes up on the wrong side of the cryo chamber one decade and goes full Dr. Evil, but let's consider incentives. House is driven by profit and his long-term vision to resurrect civilization on his terms. He gains nothing by oppressing or impoverishing the people in his domain. Gamblers and tourists don't come to a dystopian police state for vacation. His wealth is directly tied to New Vegas being an attractive, booming hub of commerce. That acts as a market check on his power. If he overreaches, Vegas loses its charm, people leave, and his profits dry up. Contrast that with the NCR. They can raise taxes at gunpoint on their citizens to fund whatever, even if people are unhappy. Or the Legion. Caesar can squeeze his subjects till they bleed, and they can't go anywhere else once he conquers them all. House at least has to keep his customers, citizens, tourists, businesses satisfied enough to stay. You mention he takes a cut from the casinos, true, 5% off the top. But that was a voluntary contract. He provided those tribes Zomertas, chairman, white gloves with the tech and territory to run casinos. And in return they pay rent or a commission. They entered that deal willingly, rather than remain nomadic tribals. Try calling NCR taxes voluntary. Good one. Or Legion tribute a contract. Ha! If you don't pay Caesar, you're on a cross. If you don't pay House's casino fee, well, you just don't get to run a casino on his strip. Reasonable. Now I've entertained enough NCR cheerleading and Legion apologism. Let me highlight why your factions are ethically and economically inferior. Caleb, you basically admit the Legion is brutal. Crucifixions, slavery, total obedience to one man. How in Adam's name is that compatible with any notion of individual rights? Rothbard's non-aggression principle doesn't have a, unless you think they're degenerate clause. The Legion whips and enslaves even innocent people if they happen to belong to a tribe that resisted conquest. I don't care if Caesar calls it recruitment. Forcing people into slavery or your army at spear point is the definition of aggression. You brag that the Legion wiped out raiders and chem fiends, great, but they also wipe out anyone who won't bow. There are accounts of legionnaires annihilating entire communities like the Bitter Springs Massacre. Oh wait, that one was NCR's bad. But Legion's done similar in Arizona. You know the whole deal with the Burned Man, right? Graham led the Legion to destroy dozens of tribes. Those who weren't useful were exterminated. You can't seriously think a society founded on mass murder and slavery leads to long-term liberty. You'll end up with a cowed population that only knows how to take orders. That's not fostering independent, freedom-loving individuals. That's creating a nation of serfs. Economically, the Legion is a joke. They don't allow gambling, barely tolerate traders except those sanctioned by Caesar, and discourage technology. Caesar likes to keep his folk using machetes while he privately pores over a pre-war autodoc. Hypocrite much? How do you develop an economy when half your workforce are slaves, and you've banned half of peacetime enterprise as decadent? The Legion might have more stable money than NCR. I'll grant. Their coin is honest silver and gold. Sound money is good. But what good is sound money in a society that doesn't let free markets flourish? You can't buy much with a denarius in Legion, lands except maybe maize and a Brahmin hide, because they've stomped out entrepreneurs. Most entrepreneurs were in those tribes they conquered, or in caravan companies they scared off. And, Aaron, dear representative of our fine republic, I haven't forgotten you. You praise NCR's stability and law, but NCR's law still enforces victimless crimes and meddles in markets. They outlaw things like gambling or prostitution in their core territories, New Reno being a wild exception they only tolerate begrudgingly. If NCR takes Vegas, how long before they shut down or heavily tax the casinos and brothels? We've heard the Mojave locals' fears. The moment Vegas becomes NCR territory, all the vice that makes it profitable will get regulated into the ground. The NCR will bring the Brahmin barons and monopolies, their political cronies, to carve up the Mojave. Think they'll let independents like the Garrett twins in Freeside run their own casino? No. They'll favor big NCR-backed companies like Crimson Caravan, which already, by the way, teamed up with the NCR to squeeze out smaller caravan outfits. Remember Cass's Caravan, the Happy Trails? Got burned out thanks to collusion between the Crimson Caravan and the Van Graffs, who both had NCR connections. That's the kind of crony capitalism that thrives under NCR's law and order. Small traders get regulated or bought out. Big ones cozy up to the politicians. And don't get me started on NCR's money mismanagement. Their dollars are worth less and less in the Mojave because they print money to fund their expansion. That's an invisible tax robbing people of purchasing power. House with his caps and the Legion with their silver at least don't devalue currency on a whim. So economically, NCR is skating on thin ice. They promise prosperity but deliver a bureaucracy that can't even provision its outposts properly. How many times have we heard NCR troopers complain they're low on water ammo? You name it. Do you really trust that inefficiency to turn Vegas into a bastion of free markets? Or will it become another over-administered province where enterprising locals drown in red tape?
All right, gloves-o then. Dominic, I'm not going to defend every awful thing the Legion has done. From a strict libertarian ethics stance, yes, they violate the NAP more often than a drunk NCR ranger violates curfew. But let me make the case in more pragmatic terms. You ask how a society of serfs leads to freedom. I ask, how does a lawless society lead to anything but constant predation? The wasteland was a bunch of tribes raiding and victimizing each other until Caesar united them. Sometimes it takes a Leviathan to smash smaller tyrannies. The raider gangs, the corrupt chiefs, the cannibal tribes, Legion wiped them out or forged them into something stronger. In New Vegas lore, which is our reality, Caesar's Legion has made the territories east of the Colorado safer and more orderly than they ever were. Roads are safe to travel because banditry is punishable by death. People know the rules and the consequences. It's harsh justice, but it is justice of a sort, swift and not subject to bribes or political pull. Private law in the sense that the Legion's justice is delivered by individuals, legionnaires, decanus, etc. On the spot, not by endless procedures. You might even compare it to ancient saga societies, harsh honor-based law. Sure, it's centered on Caesar's edicts, but it's consistent. Don't mess with the Legion and you won't get hurt. Many traders do travel under Legion protection because they know nobody will dare attack a caravan with Legion banners. You talk about slavery, as if NCR doesn't have its own forms of slavery. What do you call NCR's conscription or those prisoners with jobs? Powder gangers were NCR's chain gang laborers who revolted. The Legion at least enslaves as a way to integrate and educate conquered people in their new society. Believe it or not, Legion slaves aren't just sitting idle. They're often put to work repairing roads, farming, supporting the army's logistics. In the long run, those people are arguably better off than being dead or prey to raiders. And some can even earn their way out. A few slaves become legionaries if they prove themselves. It's not chattel slavery based on race or something, it's war captivity. That doesn't excuse it fully, but in the context of the wasteland, it's almost a merciful alternative to just massacring all enemies. And by the way, NCR had no problem working with slavers themselves when convenient. Remember Fallout 2? NCR hired mercs from the Bishop family who were in bed with slavers. Hypocrisy much? Dominic, you also downplay the Legion's economic potential. True, they're not about casinos and high-tech right now, but consider what happens after a Legion victory. Caesar's smart, he's not going to keep people in the Dark Ages forever. He's already shown interest in technology. He's got an autodoc and has followers like Caesar's personal physician because he knows medicine is useful. If he takes New Vegas, he won't just torch everything. He might shut down the casinos, yeah. But the infrastructure, the dam, the solar plant at Helios, the roads, he'll use those. The Legion could adopt advanced tech and industry once the degenerate influences are purged. It's like a hardcore reset to enforce virtue and strength, then gradually liberalize once stability is unquestioned. You think House or NCR can ever let go of power willingly? Caesar actually has an ethos. He models on Rome, sure, but Rome evolved. Maybe after Caesar consolidates, we'd see a move from pure dictatorship to appointed governors. Maybe even competition between legionary commanders that could decentralize power. That's speculative. But so is assuming House stays benevolent. And don't kid yourself, Dominic. House isn't exactly encouraging free markets outside tourism. He has a stranglehold on the most lucrative industry, gambling. And he's not about to let anyone set up a competing casino without bending the knee. How's that different from the Legion not letting unaffiliated tribes run their own little fiefdoms? It's competition suppression in both cases. One just does it with contracts, the other with violence. But either way, there's a monopoly on force.
Caleb, I think your argument just went from Rothbard to Machiavelli real quick. At least you're honest about the violations. You're basically saying ends justify the means. Smash everything now, hope for liberty later. That's a huge gamble, and with Caesar holding the cards, I doubt he's handing out freedom when the dust settles. The man literally calls himself Caesar and has pseudo-Roman ambitions. Historically, Rome didn't liberalize after conquest. It became an empire with a god-emperor. Caesar's already halfway there in his own mind. You hope he'll allow decentralization? All evidence says otherwise. He destroyed the tribal identities of those he conquered to make them all legion. Not exactly a federalist. And if he croaks, Legate Lanius, that psychopath, takes over. Good luck getting any gentle reforms out of him. You mention NCR's conscription and prisoner labor like it's equal to legion slavery. The big difference, NCR's system, however flawed, has laws and public accountability. NCR citizens can vote to end conscription or push prison reforms if enough will is there. Under Legion, slaves and subjects don't get a voice, period. Also, NCR typically imprisons actual criminals, even if some might be political prisoners, but generally powder gangers were thieves and murderers preying on folks. Legion enslaves whoever's unlucky enough to be on the other side of the battlefield. You see no moral difference there? If tomorrow Legion marches into an NCR town that's done nothing aggressive, they'll enslave or conscript half the populace just for being there. NCR doesn't do that when they take a place. They usually establish a sheriff, maybe disarm troublemakers, and start collecting taxes. Annoying, but not the same as lifelong servitude. Dominic, you pointed out NCR's shortcomings in economics and vices fair. NCR's more puritanical laws could indeed clamp down on New Vegas's fun stuff, but there is internal debate in NCR about that. Remember, NCR already tolerates New Reno back in the day, a city of vice, because trying to outlaw everything is impractical. I'd wager even if NCR annexed Vegas, they'd keep it semi-autonomous as an entertainment zone, to milk caps from tourists at least. And if they get too heavy-handed, they'll face local resistance. The New Vegas citizens aren't going to suddenly turn into docile Californians. They'll push back if NCR rangers try to shut down their liquor stores. There's a dynamic there that could keep NCR somewhat in check. Again, not ideal, but something. Plus, NCR brings something House and Legion both lack: scalability. NCR has an entire republic infrastructure. They can repopulate the Mojave, set up farms they already tried with the sharecropper farms using water from the Vault 34. Too bad the Vault's equipment was wonky. They have the numbers and institutions to actually rebuild civilization broadly, not just one hotspot. More towns, more trade routes, more everything. A rising tide lifts all boats, as the saying goes. If the NCR can stabilize New Vegas and Hoover Dam, they'll attract thousands of settlers, entrepreneurs, ranchers to the region. That means more business for everyone. Yes, with taxes and rules, but also with customers and production. House's Vegas might be glitzy, but it's a small bubble in a huge desert. Legion's lands are vast but undeveloped, stuck in a military campaign mode. NCR, for its faults, encourages civilian migration and enterprise. That's why you have Crimson Caravan gunrunners, heck, even the followers before the schism, piggybacking on NCR expansion. A lot of Mojave folks owe their livelihood to NCR presence. Take Julie Farkas and the Followers Clinic. It's mostly serving Freeside victims because NCR hasn't fully annexed and provided services. But if NCR did, maybe the locals would get integrated healthcare, schools, etc. Like in NCR Heartland. And Dominic, about currency and inflation, absolutely. NCR's monetary policy is trash from an Austrian perspective. They overissued NCR dollars to fund the Mojave campaign, and now it's like 2.5 NCR dollars to a cap, right? That's roughly 40% of a cap's value, and caps themselves are backed by water merchants in the hub. Legion's silver coin holds value better. But guess what? Inflation can be fixed with reform, and currency competition can keep them honest. If House stays independent, NCR dollars might stabilize, or they'll be forced to adopt a gold standard to compete with caps denarii. In the long run, an NCR that wins and faces internal pressure could adopt those reforms, especially if smart people like Aradesh or Tandy's legacy folks had influence. Historically, they were more idealistic. The rot set in later. If Legion wins, good luck ever seeing free banking. Caesar will mandate his coins by decree. If House wins, you still have a fiat issue because House would likely prefer caps, which are fine, but NCR's economy might tank and cause chaos in surrounding regions. Honestly, I trust NCR's chances of reform slightly more, because at least there's a mechanism for change. House is static one man's whim, and Legion is rigid one man's whim enforced by swords.
This is spicier than a dead claw omelet. Death claw? Let me step in on this currency thing and a couple of points both of you raised. First, Aaron, you banking on NCR reform is like betting on a rad scorpion becoming a vegetarian. It's theoretically possible, but not likely in our lifetime. The NCR's problems, corruption, inflation, expansionism, those aren't accidents, they're features of any large government. As Rothbard would say, power breeds irresponsibility. Why would NCR voluntarily shrink its gravy train of taxes and cheap money? Sure, some idealists might try. But meanwhile, President Kimball and his Senate buddies are busy getting fat off Brahmin Baron donations and war contracts. They have every incentive to keep milking the system. More land, more taxes, more monopolies. The gun runners and Crimson Caravan love NCR because it gives them lucrative deals and sometimes crushes their competition. As you noted with Cass's Caravan, there's a military-industrial complex alive and well. The only thing that might force NCR to reform is a massive crisis, like losing the dam or their money becoming toilet paper. But even then, reform could just be doubling down on controls, price controls, more taxes to cover deficits. You know, the usual government solutions, Caleb. You paint a future Legion utopia after a hard reset. I find that highly speculative. Historically, once a regime has absolute power, it doesn't loosen its grip just because things are stable. If anything, it finds new threats to justify staying in control. Caesar's ideal society is one where everyone follows his vision of purity and strength. That leaves zero room for the kind of pluralism and spontaneous order that libertarians value. You can't have free markets if any deviation from state-sanctioned virtue is crushed. A chemist tries to open a medical chem shop to sell remedies. Legion calls it sinful and hangs him for dealing chems. A group of farmers wants to trade freely with an NCR town across the river. Legion calls it treason with the enemy. That's not going away magically after victory. The Legion ethos is anti-individualism at its core, for the greater good of the Legion. Caesar literally quotes Hegel and speaks of dialectics. He's building an ideology. Those tend to entrench themselves. Now, Aaron, you did bring up a House negative that I grudgingly acknowledge. If House goes bonkers or someone like Yes Man, that rogue AI, replaces him, New Vegas could become very dictatorial. But here's the thing. Because House's domain is smaller and focused, if he did become intolerable, people could leave or even revolt on a smaller scale. Removing a tyrant from one city is more doable than from an entire country or empire. It's still tough because, you know, robot army. But in principle, Vegas folks have the option to slip out into the desert, or organize via those very crime families if House gets out of hand. Under NCR, if you don't like it, you have to trek hundreds of miles to get outside their reach, and they're ever expanding. Under Legion, run east and you hit more Legion, run west and you might hit NCR, damned either way. House is contained. If you want an alternative, there's the rest of the Mojave, or even convincing the Mojave boss or others to help oust him if needed. Honestly though, House not going crazy is more likely. He's a rational actor, not a psycho. One more thing, representation. Aaron, you keep lauding NCR's representation and law, but there's a saying, democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on dinner. NCR's majority can vote away the minority's rights any day. Ask the native Mojave inhabitants how much say they'd get once annexed. Probably near zero. As they'd be a tiny fraction of the electorate swamped by voters back in Shady Sands who've never even been here. At least House and Caesar are up front. They're the boss. NCR gives you the pageantry of choice while doing what it wants regardless. Kimball's not listening to wasteland villagers. As an anarcho-capitalist, I don't find that morally superior. Arguably it's more insidious because it dupes people into consenting to their own subjugation. House doesn't ask your consent, true, but he also isn't going to tax your income or draft your kids under false pretenses. He wants to make money by offering a product, a secure, dazzling city. You partake if you want, or you go elsewhere. That's a voluntary exchange in essence. NCR and Legion claim your territory as theirs even if you'd rather not.
On that note of voluntary exchange, here's a thought experiment. If all three factions set up shop and didn't force anyone, just offered their services of governance, who'd get the most takers from the common folk? I bet a lot would initially go NCR because of familiarity in numbers. But over time, if people saw Legion territory being crime-free and disciplined, and NCR towns being corrupt or overtaxed, they might choose the Legion's order. Likewise, some entrepreneurial folks would choose Houses Vegas for the freedom to wheel and deal. In a weird way, the Mojave right now is that experiment. People can sorta choose to live in NCR-protected areas, for example McCarran area, or Mojave Outpost, or live under Legion threat east of the river, though that's mostly forced now, or hang in the independent Vegas sphere. And what do we see? NCR areas have relative prosperity, but also lots of bureaucracy and poverty in the margins. Legion areas, from what intel we have, are safe but culturally oppressive. And Vegas is rich in the middle but small, and with its own authoritarian quirks. It's like a live demonstration of three political philosophies. As anarcho-capitalists, we're picking our poison here, but I still say the Legion will produce the toughest, most resilient society. You guys worry about freedom to trade and have fun. I worry about the existence of a society in this hellscape. Without the Legion's iron hand, everything falls apart to gangs and petty despots. The NCR tries, but they're too weak and too compromised internally to truly pacify the region. The fact we're even debating alternatives means NCR didn't exactly knock it out of the park. House only cares about his strip. Step outside it, and a swarm of cazadores will carry you off before a Securitron ever shows up to help. The Legion is comprehensive. They secure the roads, the small villages, everything. Give them Vegas and the dam, and you'd have a continent spanning Peace Pax Romana, baby. Then maybe we philosophers can start injecting ideas of liberty once people aren't getting shot or eaten daily.
I think you underestimate how much stability NCR already provides, Caleb. Yes, the Mojave's still dangerous, but NCR's been here only a few years and has made a difference. Places like Prim, Novak, and Good Springs have survived largely because NCR kept the Legion and major threats at bay so far. The fact that Vegas wasn't overrun by the Legion already is due in part to NCR holding Hoover Dam. And NCR's way of securing a town doesn't involve crucifying half the population, so pardon me if I find that a tad more ethical. Dominion by fear works until it doesn't. History shows repressive regimes eventually face rebellion or collapse from within. NCR's softer approach might be less immediately effective than terror, but it builds more genuine buy-in long-term. Dominic. I chuckled at Rad Scorpion becoming vegetarian, but stranger things have happened. Look, NCR might not reform fully on its own, but a victory at Hoover Dam will be a wake-up call too. They nearly lost New Vegas to either House or Legion. Maybe that humbles them. There are voices within NCR, even in the military, like Chief Hanlon and others calling for scaling back, consolidating rather than endless expansion. A Mojave success might actually get them to pause and fix their internal issues. If not, then as you say, crisis will force it. And between NCR's bureaucrats and Legion's fanatics, I'd rather deal with out-of-touch politicians, easier to satire and vote out, than to deprogram a fanatical theocracy which Legion essentially is, worshipping Caesar as a figurehead. Us. For House. One city as a beacon is nice, but one city can't secure a whole region's freedom. Eventually, NCR or Legion would come knocking again if House ever showed weakness, say House finally dies for real or his tech fails. Vegas alone isn't enough to keep liberty alive. It'd be snuffed out by bigger fish eventually. Unless House managed to rapidly expand his model, which he hasn't done in 7 years beyond the Strip and a few utility facilities. NCR offers a network of settlements, an entire society. Sure, it's statist, but within that, there's space for people to live semi-freely. Look at the hub or boneyard back in NCR territory. Merchants and communities thrive and even self-organize a lot, with NCR mostly providing a backdrop of law. I can imagine a future where NCR's regions gain more autonomy, maybe like states' rights kind of deal, and the central government is forced to restrain itself. A free Vegas under House could influence NCR too, like show them that laissez-faire can work, causing political pressure to liberalize NCR's own economy. But that only happens if NCR sticks around. If NCR is destroyed or chased off, then it's just Legion versus House. And eventually Legion will overwhelm House by sheer manpower. Spare me the Securitron army hype. Legion can field thousands of soldiers. House had maybe an army of 2,000 robots at best after the chip upgrade. Numbers game could catch up if the Legion consolidates elsewhere and returns. So ironically, NCR's continued existence is important even for House's independence. They balance each other out.
And that balance is exactly why I root for House. He is the balancing force. An independent Vegas under House forces NCR to check its expansion as they have to respect his turf or face high cost and keeps Legion from crossing west. It's a quasi-balance of power that could give the Mojave a chance to develop pockets of freedom like Vegas, and possibly reform the big players by example or stalemate. But that only holds as long as House stands. Still, to your point, Aaron, one city can't do it all fair. If I could have an ideal, it'd be multiple city-states like Houses Vegas dotting the wasteland, trading freely, united in mutual defense pacts against big empires. But we have one house, not a dozen. NCR's not going to allow a dozen houses. Legion certainly wouldn't. We're all kinda acknowledging none of these outcomes is a straight shot to AnCap paradise. It's a matter of which has the best ethical, political, and economic advantages given the circumstances. Aaron likes NCR for rule of law and scalability with some liberty veneer. Caleb likes Legion for security, unity, and long-term strength. I like House for immediate freedom in a small zone and the innovation wealth it creates.
And none of us are budging, it seems. We're as stubborn as a herd of Brahmin. I knew libertarians could debate, but this is wild. We're defending a democracy, a dictatorship, and a techno-oligarch, all in the name of someday achieving a stateless society. Kind of funny if you think about it. Rothbard would either facepalm or find it entertaining.
Hey, Rothbard wrote about incrementalism now and then. Take what liberty wins you can. Today the Mojave, tomorrow the world. If NCR secures New Vegas and Hoover Dam, I'll be lobbying for a Mojave territory legislature that's friendly to individual rights. Baby steps.
I'll toast to that with a glass of Nuka-Cola. Meanwhile, I'll be at the tops, enjoying the free market in action under House's neon-lit heaven. You guys can fill out forms in triplicate, or salute a flag all you want. I'll be watching the caps flow.
And I'll be training in the arena, sharpening my machete, preparing for the new dawn of the Legion's empire, where, in due time, we'll teach everyone the true meaning of order and maybe slip in some liberty when Caesar's not looking.
Just keep that machete sheathed around my property, pal. NCR's got sniper rifles trained on the horizon for any Legion aggression.
All right, settle down, you two. We've made our cases and probably scared off any prospect of consensus.
Consensus is overrated. That's NCR talk. But hey, good debate. We may disagree fiercely, but I respect you clowns.
Same here. We all want freedom, we just have radically different ideas of the road there.
And in true New Vegas fashion, the house always wins, at least in having the last word, which I'll take now. May the best faction win, and may the future bring more liberty than what we've got now, however it happens.